I do first want to say that, obviously we're dealing with a tragedy in America today, and our hearts go out to the folks on board and the family members and all those affected by the crash at DCA. I mean, it's truly a horrific event.
Absolutely, I was crying today. I've seen in my 77 years a lot of horrific events, and this certainly ranks high among them. I know nothing we can say will console the families and loved ones, but all we can do, as you noted, is tell you all we grieve for you. We hold out our hearts for every one of you. And Donald Trump started off his response to the tragedy very much in this vein. He started off doing the right thing, calling for a moment of silence for the 67 victims of that horrible tragedy over Reagan National Airport. But shortly after that, it went downhill fast and downhill hard to the point where it became one of the worst moments in the history of the American presidency. I'm not being hyperbolic. One of the great tests of a presidency is that you are the consoler in chief. You are the explainer in chief. It is up to you to bring the nation together in the wake of a horrible tragedy. It is up to you to offer to the American people unbiased, non-political facts as they are known, or to explain to the American people the facts are not yet known, but we're going to wait until the facts are in before we jump to any conclusion. Every modern American president has succeeded in this role of comforter, explainer, uniter in chief. Franklin Roosevelt in 1941 did so after the horrific attack on Pearl Harbor. Ronald Reagan did so in the wake of the Challenger catastrophe. Bill Clinton did so in the wake of the horrific Oklahoma City bombing. And of course, George W. Bush did so in the wake of the deadly, destructive 9/11 attacks. These are both Republican and Democratic presidents who have risen to the occasion of a tragedy to show compassion, to show empathy, to bring the nation together in our common humanity. This was very much of a bipartisan achievement on the part of very different, very diverse presidents. And then Donald Trump shattered this tradition, and not in a small way. He, in a sense, exploded it in many different ways. First of all, the investigation had barely begun. We heard from the head of the National Transportation Safety Board, who had originally been appointed to the board by Donald Trump. And she said, "We have no answers yet. It's the investigation has barely begun. It will be, likely a week or much more before we have the facts, and we're not going to speculate. It would be incredibly irresponsible to speculate, just as previous presidents have not speculated." What did Donald Trump do? He speculated. He had no facts. He had no hard information. Nobody did. As the responsible official said, the investigation had barely even begun. There were no answers, and yet Donald Trump speculated about what, in his view, was likely responsible for the tragedy. But that wasn't bad enough. It got much worse. Not only did he speculate about the causes of the tragedy. He blamed it on his Democratic opponents and allegedly on their embrace of diversity, equity, and inclusion policies. The crash happened on his watch, but he had no responsibility for it. The responsibility lay with Barack Obama, who hasn't been president, since the beginning of 2017. He blamed it on his predecessor, uh, Joe Biden, and he claimed that it was their DEA policies that, when you use your common sense, in his word, may well have caused the tragedy. He said this without a single hard fact to back it up and blatantly lied. He said Obama gutted the standards of mental and physical fitness to be a air traffic controller. And then the great Donald Trump came in and vastly elevated the standards. And then Joe Biden and Pete Buttigieg, the transportation secretary, put them into the gutter. No truth to any of those claims. And of course, he cited no facts in support of them. Pete Buttigieg issued a very powerful statement. Use your common sense. If in fact Buttigieg and Biden had gutted the standards for being an air traffic controller, we should have had mayhem in the skies for 4 years. In fact, as Buttigieg pointed out, given billions of passengers flying commercial aircrafts throughout the tenure of his secretaryship and the Biden administration, there was not a single fatal air crash, not one, totally belying Trump's claim that Biden and Buttigieg had turned the FAA and the air traffic controllers into an utter disaster. In fact, the last fatal commercial crash was way back in 2009, the very beginning of the Obama administration, well before any DEA alleged policies would have, taken effect. In 7 years under Obama, in 4 years under Biden, not a single fatal commercial air crash. The only modern one occurred in the early days of the Trump administration. I'm not saying Trump was responsible, but it is utterly false, irresponsible, demagogic to blame it on your Democratic opponents, even though the record totally belies what you're saying. And there is not a shred of evidence that DEI policies had anything to do with this crash. Trump read us this list of, supposedly horrific disabilities, claiming that under Biden and Buttigieg, such persons became air traffic controllers. Another big lie. That was a standard boilerplate American with Disabilities Act statement. Guess what president also had that statement on the FAA website? Donald Trump. It had nothing to do with the very rigorous standards of mental and physical fitness. I think it's a year or two, maybe 2 years of training that you have to go through to be an air traffic controller. Just a blatant fabrication on the part of Donald Trump. But it gets worse. Who is he essentially blaming for the crash with his fabrications? Black people, minorities, and women, the supposed recipients, unqualified recipients of these DEI programs. And this is consistent with Donald Trump's racism and misogyny that has characterized his entire political career. It's not an accident that he would blame this on women and racial minorities. He burst into politics on the biggest, worst racial lie in the history of American politics, that America's first Black president, Barack Obama, was an illegitimate president because he was really born in Africa not in Hawaii. He persisted with this, even though Obama, which no other president had to do, produced his long form birth certificate, even though his birth was mentioned in the newspapers in Hawaii, even though eyewitnesses testified to it. He held to this big racist lie for 5 years. And his racism continued against his mixed race opponent, Kamala Harris, who he claimed suddenly turned black, in recent years for political purposes, utterly ignoring the fact that she attended an historically black university, joined a black sorority, always identified as both black and Asian. This is one of the worst memes of Jim Crow era discrimination when white people defined the racial identity of minorities, just absolutely horrific. And then, he resurrected another blatant racist slur from the Jim Crow era that she's low IQ, stupid, unable to take on the task of the presidency. And of course, he made all kinds of misogynist statements about the so-called nasty women, Clinton and Harris, that he was against, that they were too weak to stand up to foreign leaders. This is not an accident. This is something that Trump has traded upon for 2 decades, and that is central to his appeal to his base. So we got to put this in real context. I think your beautiful mom said I accidentally said DEA. Of course, I mean DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion, which only opens up opportunities for minorities and women who historically have been discriminated against. It doesn't mean that you hire unqualified persons who can't do the job. And Donald Trump says, DEI destroys merit, and I'm all about merit. What was the least meritorious thing perhaps any American president has done? Donald Trump's incompetent, dangerous, destructive response to the pandemic, when he lied to the American people, saying it's no worse than the flu, it's under control, it's just going to disappear. Instead of a effective, strong response, he promoted quack cures like hydroxychloroquine or ingesting bleach. His own head of his COVID-19 task force said that if Donald Trump had in fact responded forcefully and effectively and not incompetently to the pandemic, he could have saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Over 1 million lives were lost to the pandemic. So much for merit. And arguably, Donald Trump has appointed the least meritorious cabinet in the history of the country. I've talked about this before. Pete Hegseth, is he, the best and the brightest for Secretary of Defense, who's never had a command position, who independent authorities said wouldn't even qualify for a mid-level position in the military, who didn't understand virtually anything about America's international obligations, who had all kinds of allegations of sexual harassment and drinking problems, whose one management experience with the charity turned out badly. Was RFK Jr. the best and the brightest to head up America's health system? This is a guy who mongers quack science, who has been through, despite what he says in his confirmation, we know that's worthless, has mongered dangerous, unscientific theories about vaccines that have saved millions of lives of our children, and could not answer, in fact, botched the answer to the most basic questions about our two biggest and most important healthcare programs: Medicare for old people like me, and Medicaid for people who are less affluent and can't afford to buy private insurance. He could not answer accurately the most basic questions about these programs that he supposedly would be overseeing. That's the best and the brightest. It's just nonsense. Finally, what did Donald Trump do upon becoming president? He followed Elon Musk to force out the administrator of the FAA. He fired the head of the Transportation Security Administration. Uh, he froze positions in the federal government when, in fact, we're short of air traffic controllers. He put out a memo designed to get federal employees to leave their jobs, again, when we're short of air traffic controllers, and perhaps most egregiously, wiped out the Air Safety Advisory Board, which has made important recommendations over time in a bipartisan, independent way for air safety. I'm going to give you a little thought experiment. You know, I don't like hypotheticals, but I'm going to throw this out. Imagine if Joe Biden, when he got into office, had done exactly the same things that I just outlined that Donald Trump had done. And then a week later, there was a horrific air crash tragedy. I'm not saying that anything Trump did caused the tragedy. Of course not. And I wouldn't say if it was on the Biden watch that anything Biden did, even if he did exactly the same things, caused the tragedy. But I guarantee you, the same folks, you know, Donald Trump and his allies, would be saying Biden committed the crime of the century and would be would find this way to pin the air tragedy on Joe Biden. You know, past presidents could have politicized tragedies, but chose not to. It's only Donald Trump who politicized this tragedy, just like he politicized the horrific fires in California. Unique among presidents, and politicized it based on fabrications. Franklin Roosevelt could have blamed Pearl Harbor on Republican isolationists, saying, you know, they led Japan to believe that if they struck a blow against the US, we would just fold up and, you know, not go to war. Didn't do that. Bill Clinton could have blamed Oklahoma City on Republicans in Congress, saying they encouraged extremism. Didn't do that. George W. Bush could have blamed the 9/11 tragedy on the alleged lax policies of his predecessors. They didn't do that. I'm not saying if they had done that, it would have been right, but, you know, they could have politicized it, and they did not. That's what makes what Trump did so horrific and so out of step with the great traditions of American presidents, both Republican and Democrat, both liberal and conservatives. And rightly, virtually every independent organization that deals with air safety has blasted Trump for jumping the gun and making these baseless claims. And as I mentioned, the head of the National Transportation Safety Board, initially appointed by Trump to the board, has said, we don't speculate. We are very far from having any idea what caused this crash. Want to mention a couple of other things. Of course, this tragedy and Trump's horrific response overshadowed something else that's very important that's going on today. And what was that, Sam?
That was the hearings of Patel for the FBI director and Tulsi Gabbard for what is intelligence something?
Yeah, head of national intelligence, head of the Office of National Intelligence. And somehow, you know, they tried to rewrite their history. You know, oh, Patel says, I never had an enemies list, even though it was right there in his book, even though he posted a video of himself with a chainsaw cutting off the heads of his political opponents. Oh, I never, you know, said anything good about QAnon, even though he's directly on the record saying that. He couldn't remember that he was on a podcast like 7 or 8 times with an extreme right-wing podcast. Is right down the line. And, you know, these confirmation conversions are worth nothing. Uh, you're going to get what you see, what you've seen over time. When he's not in a confirmation hearing from Kash Patel, you're not going to get the Kash Patel who had this confirmation conversion when his confirmation was up. Once he's confirmed, he can forget all that and do absolutely anything he wants. Same thing with Tulsi Gabbard, who wouldn't say that Edward Snowden, who released, I don't know, over 1 million secret documents undermining America's national security. As head, and then fled to Russia as head of ONI, she wouldn't say he was a traitor. And she tried to explain away and disavow her positive statements about Putin and, her visit to Assad and his downplaying of the use of chemical weapons. It's just confirmation conversion, rewriting history. You're going to get what you've seen over the years from these two nominees, presuming they get through. It looks like Patel's going to get through pretty easily. I'm not certain about Gabbard.
Pretty crazy 24 hours, huh?
Crazy and sad. I weary of this. I just weary of this. How much destructive fabrications and provocations do we have to try to explain from Donald Trump? He's only been in office slightly over a week. We have almost 4 more years to go.
Yeah.
And he's already, shattered one of the greatest traditions of the American presidency, being a uniter, healer in chief.
All right. Any more comments before we get to questions, Dad?
No, I think I'm ready for questions. I could say a lot more, but I think I've said enough.
Yeah. Okay. Some housekeeping stuff. Remember to like the stream if you're watching. We have 1,700 people watching, but only 555 likes. You can follow us both on social media. Remember, members and donations get priority for questions, but we can't guarantee all those questions will get answered. Yes, sir?
I think you have something important. Maybe it's premature, but we're looking forward to likely having guests, right?
Yes. Stay tuned. Our first guest is scheduled for this Thursday. Should I say who it is going to be, or should we just leave it as a surprise?
Let's just say it's someone who's very much in the media, very outspoken, who's going to be a sensational, provocative guest for us.
Right. Any more housekeeping things I forgot?
Memberships and donations are always critical.
I said that.
I think you probably said it,
I
but
said that.
I'm old. I don't hear real
All
well.
right. Dad, do you see on Zoom where it says the chat feature? If you move your cursor over Zoom, you see where it says chat.
Where do I move my cursor? I see audio, visual, chat.
Yeah, click that. You see there's a dialogue.
Oh, it says Sam Lichtman's Zoom meeting.
Right. So for a few of these questions, Dad, I'm going to send you the questions in text form there, and you need to read them and answer them.
So I'm going to read them, not you.
Just tonight. Look, if you know,
All
you
right.
know, but
Putting more pressure on the old man, huh?
it's just tonight. If you know why, I don't want to say why, but
Don't say why. I
but
don't want to hear any technical
yeah,
matters. I'm an old dinosaur.
right.
I'm
So
happy to do it.
I appreciate that. And normally I wouldn't make you do this.
Your wish is my command.
Wow.
Oh, so the first question is like 10 lines long.
Correct.
Oh my God. And I can't even see the beginning of it.
Oh, you can't?
I think I can. In 2023, U.S. President Joe Biden nominated Mike G. Whitaker as administrator of the FAA. The United States Senate confirmed Whitaker by a 98-0 vote. Chris Rocheleau, if I mispronounce his name, excuse me, was appointed in January 2025, before the accident, as acting FAA administrator after the resignation of Mike G. Whitaker. The news reported that staffing was not normal the day of the DC crash. Could so much change at the top contribute to staffing not being normal? That is a fabulous smart question. And I did talk about the experienced administrator, who you identify as Whitaker, being forced out right at the beginning of the administration. I am not going to mimic Donald Trump and speculate about the causes of the crash. But I would say, a lot of churning at the top, a lot of changes in policy, which I outlined, which directly affect the air traffic controllers, would be, and I'm not claiming it is, but would be a much more plausible explanation than this ridiculous attempt to blame it on women and racial minorities through DEI programs. $10 donation. Is it true that Trump fired various people, including the head of TSA? It is true. I don't have the entire list of those he fired, but he fired the only woman commander of one of the American service branches, the woman commander of the Coast Guard. He fired something like a dozen career prosecutors who were involved in the very legitimate prosecution of Donald Trump, who were just doing their job. Those are just some examples. And yes, as I mentioned, he also fired the head of TSA, creating a lot of turmoil within the government. And let me also say, he fired a dozen or more inspectors general who are supposed to be independent and who are one of the few guardrails we have against a dictatorial president. How am I doing in reading these
You're
questions?
doing fantastic. I'm really impressed.
Donald Trump fired the head of the Transportation Security Administration on his first day. We talked about that. Froze the hiring of air traffic controllers last week. We talked about that. He's gutting basic safety. Why? What does he get out of it? That's a really, really good question. I'm just flabbergasted why we would do that. Of course, he takes no responsibility for it, wants to put the blame on everyone else, which is Trump's MO, not just throughout his political career, but throughout his career as a businessman. When he went bankrupt, it was all the fault of someone else, had nothing to do with him. I guess what he gets out of it, he wants chaos. Says, I was elected to cause chaos, to shake things up. And he wants to undermine the federal bureaucracy so that he can put in his own loyalists. As I said, you know, he has appointed arguably the least meritorious set of high officials in the history of the country. He's not focused on merit. He's created affirmative action for Trump loyalists. But why, he would do this for those on basic safety? I'm not sure he targeted officials responsible for safety. I think that was part of his broader attack on the federal bureaucracy.
All right, Dad, I'm back for this one. Our next question is from Suki Bomb. They say, I work at a university for a program funded by the NIH, and this attack on DEI may end my job despite the grant already being awarded to us. How are your colleagues reacting at American University? And do you have any suggestions for how the higher education community can respond, not react, to this trying time? Being reactive to everything Trump says and does is exactly what he wants and makes us frozen with fear.
You couldn't be more on point. I know we have a very smart audience, and that was an absolutely brilliant comment. I'm on sabbatical, so I haven't been at the university uh, since the election. Well, not since the election, but since the inauguration of Trump. So I can't say, but uh, maybe he's not deliberately targeting safety positions, but he is deliberately targeting education, K to 12 education and university education. Like Governor Abbott in Texas or Governor DeSantis in Florida, he wants to bring education under his thumb so that educators would be uh, not free to speak the truth, but would be compelled to adhere to his own Republican conservative orthodoxy. I think it's very important that you consult with your bosses at the university and with the HR people at your university to see the ways in which you can insulate your position and maybe your unit as well from the attack on the part of Donald Trump. You may also want to consult with the university council with regard to the measures that can be taken. And, affirmatively, I think it's very important, as much as it puts you at risk. And Donald Trump understands that. He wants to instill fear. He wants to make you afraid to speak out. But I think it's very important that you and your colleagues and educators all over the country speak out. Write to your representative and senators. Write to your local officials. Meet with them. Send them emails. Put the pressure on them and, become public activists in the broader sphere. This is
Uh,
what we're doing here.
right. Mom texted me. She said we should announce our guest that's coming next week. I think we should too.
That's fine.
Um, our
Whatever
guest,
your mom wants, I'm always in tune with because she is the big brain.
our guest next week, next Thursday, February 6th, will be Kara Swisher. She's an American journalist. She's covered the business of the internet since 1994, and as of 2023, she was a contributing editor at New York Magazine. She also hosts the podcast On with Kara Swisher and is a co-host of the podcast Pivot. So that's really exciting, Dad.
She is a renowned journalist, right?
Yes.
One of the most respected and active journalists over 3 decades in the United States. It's a real find to get her on.
Yeah. Shout out to our channel manager, our business manager, Savannah, for all the bookings she's doing.
Thank you, Savannah. And we hope to have other very exciting guests over the next months.
Yes. Our next question is, why has the Latin Mass become a point of interest among some conservative and Republican circles in the U.S.? And how does this relate to broader political and cultural debates about tradition, authority, and modernity and modernity?
Well,
Modernity. I'm an
we
idiot.
have 3 hours. Because I can't give the long answer, I'll have to give the very short answer. Consult my book. It'll be out in a couple of months. It's called Conservative at the Core, A New History of American Conservatism, and it explains how conservatives have reinterpreted uh, the teachings of Christianity and Judaism, reinterpreted uh, the Bible to fit their own political views and their own political goals, political advantage. And one thing they are trying to do is return to so-called, traditional Christianity and uh, also have a much more authoritarian bent to Christian and Jewish teachings. Just look at what their supporters in the evangelical community are doing. You know what the biggest evangelical Christian denomination is?
Southern Baptist?
Yes. And what have they said about women?
Probably not great things.
They have to obey their husbands, and they can't even be pastors in churches affiliated with the organization. Kind of a return to old-fashioned authoritarian paternalism.
Our next question is one of our Discord questions from tonight. If you want to join our Discord, the link to that is in the description of this video. Also, don't forget to check out the podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. The question is from Colored Duck. They say, it is sad that all narcissistic...
Come on, Sam.
It is sad that all narcissistic leaders fail in the end, but Trump escaped his legal battles. Is it likely he will screw up and have another reckoning this time around? I imagine the iron grip on SCOTUS and Congress won't lead to an impeachment.
The only way Trump gets impeached would be if Democrats make big gains in the midterm elections of 2026. And that is not far-fetched. Typically, the party holding the White House does suffer big losses in midterm elections, as we saw under Obama in 2010 and 2014, and as we saw under Trump in 2018. For as much as Biden is reviled, he did not suffer typically big losses in the midterm elections of 2022. But as in the previous two impeachments, it will probably be to no avail other than symbolically, because there's no chance he's going to get two-thirds of senators to convict him, even if Democrats eked out a small majority.
Will the preemptive pardons issued by Biden actually protect these people? I know a guy who said, quote, pretending the pardons will protect them is pretending the rules are going to matter when Trump has power. The rules aren't going to matter. He's going to do whatever he wants and no one will stop him. Congress won't stop him. The Supreme Court won't stop him. He's going to fire anyone who disagrees with him or tells him no in the executive branch.
Under our Constitution, preemptive pardons are well within the prerogative of the president and should protect the recipients from federal prosecution, as happened in the most famous preemptive pardon. What was that, Sam?
The most famous preemptive pardon?
Preemptive, by far.
Nixon.
Nixon, when Gerald Ford preemptively pardoned Nixon.
It's hard because sometimes you ask me really hard questions and then sometimes you ask me really obvious questions, but I can never tell which one's which. So
your brain turns off when I ask you a question, huh? I'll try to ask you really hard questions.
What are you sipping on tonight?
Who was the vice president that resigned that enabled Nixon to appoint Ford, who then became president when Nixon resigned?
I know this. Wait. You gotta give me a second though. He was from Maryland, I remember, right?
Correct.
Oh, what was his name? His name was Sam, right? Samuel something?
No.
Well, give me another second.
First name did begin with an S. Come on, we can't take forever. Froggy's gonna twang you. Spiro
Agnew. Ah, damn it.
So, constitutionally, they're protected, but Trump has never felt he's bound by the law or the Constitution. He said several times, I can do anything I want as president. The Congress is not going to stop him. The Department of Justice under Patel will just encourage it. And so who knows what Trump may do to wreak his vengeance against his political enemies. He may not be constrained by the Constitution. And again, with the guardrails down, who is to stop him?
Right. Do you think that more Democrats will grow a spine in the coming months? Carolyn Kennedy certainly proved that she has one. She's a very private person. It was good to see her.
Yeah, I loved Carolyn Kennedy. As we said, we determined who put that affidavit out. We weren't certain. It's the cousin of RFK Jr., and it was a very courageous affidavit. Republicans couldn't have cared less. Probably nothing that had come out on any of these nominees would have made much of a dent with Republicans. Democrats do seem to be growing a bit of a spine. I'm not willing to predict it's going to be strong and powerful, but there is at least a glimmer of an indication that they may be growing a spine. A glimmer of an indication.
I wouldn't say they're growing like two legs. You know what I mean? And once they stand, they'll start growing a spine or something.
Yeah, we'll see.
We'll see.
But there are at least a bit of something out there.
Remember Vincent Thomas says, Professor, do you think there's anything Trump can do that will make the Republicans turn on him like how Republicans turned on Nixon during Watergate? And can you do a lecture on the possibilities of Trump trying to run for a third term or trying to stay in office?
Republicans didn't turn against Nixon till very late. Wasn't that, most Republicans early on were turning against Nixon. They basically turned against him. And I got to give him a lot of credit for it when it looked like he was doomed. But I still give Republicans credit. Doesn't look like anything that Trump could do is going to move these Republicans. Check my book out. Conservative at the Core, A New History of American Conservatism. It'll be out next couple of months. University of Notre Dame Press, Catholic press, conservative press. Uh, and it explains that Trump has kind of culminated trends that existed, from not forever in American conservatism, but certainly have roots. And Trump has normalized them, has made them central to his appeal, as we saw with his blaming of the tragedy on women and racial minorities. And that critical part of the MAGA movement has now grown independent of Trump. I explain in the book, Trump won the Republican nomination coming out of nowhere in 2016. He wasn't even included in 2015 in the polls of likely Republican nominees. Why did he win? Because he articulated uh, appeals that conservative Republicans also held in their heart, but which most conventional Republicans at that time were afraid to say. But he articulated these themes, centering on misogyny, racism, xenophobia, anti-Semitism that resonated with the core Republican base. He knows that. Otherwise, he would not have blamed this tragedy on women and racial minorities. That's absolutely consistent with what your brilliant mom calls the four stools of the Trump appeal, which have now been integrated deeply into the Republican Party. That's why, no matter what he says or does, you're not going to get a reaction negatively from Republicans.
If Republicans did slowly turn on Donald Trump, could he actually be impeached and removed from office this time? I ask because of the immunity that was given to him by the Supreme Court.
The immunity given him by the Supreme Court does not cover impeachment or conviction. It only covers criminal prosecution. And impeachment and trial in the Senate is not a criminal process. It's a constitutional process that combines elements of politics and crime, but it's not a criminal prosecution. Therefore, it is not covered by the Supreme Court's immunity decision. Moreover, if Trump is impeached and then removed under the Constitution, it explicitly, not implied, but implicitly said he is then subject to prosecution. That is not covered by the Supreme Court immunity decision. That would be basically the only way he realistically could be prosecuted if he's impeached and convicted. Don't hold your breath.
Our second Discord question from tonight is from Atomical. They say, how does Professor Lichtman respond to the fact that incumbent presidents and prime ministers all throughout the world who ran for re-election lost last year, especially when record high inflation also existed in those countries? All social media misinformation combined with backlash towards record high inflation and the COVID restrictions were all contributing factors since they're all worldwide.
I don't deny that. I think, there was a worldwide trend against incumbents. Inflation in the US was not unique. And in fact, inflation has been brought down by two-thirds or more under Biden to, reasonable 2 to 3% levels. But I've explained there were also unique factors to the American situation. I'm not going to go through them again at length, but obviously the open public trashing by Democratic leaders like Nancy Pelosi and Jamie Raskin of their elected president, their elected nominee, and pushing him out on the eve of the convention created an unprecedented situation, as did the incredible amount of disinformation put out by billionaires, led by Elon Musk, whose disinformation was seen by over 2 billion viewers, according to press reports, and who put out disinformation, spent $20 million on the abortion issue alone, which totally diffused that issue. That should have been a winning issue for Democrats. It completely fizzled.
Grayson with a $5 donation. They say, I am concerned that the entire map will start to turn red like back in the 80s under Reagan. What do you think?
I think that's unlikely. Uh, Again, it's speculation. I don't like to speculate. But if you look at where Trump stands, he has the lowest approval rating of any American president since they began tracing this back in the Eisenhower years, the lowest approval rating of any president in their first week or so in office. The only exception, you know what the only exception of another uh, beginning presidential term was?
I wasn't even listening to the question. Can you repeat
All
it?
right, Trump's first term. I'm saying he has the lowest approval rating of any early president, during this honeymoon prep period, except for his own honeymoon period in 2017. So it's not as if Trump is sweeping the American political landscape. And it's only beginning. And there are so many problems that Trump is going to face that, require merit and competence, which are not present in Donald Trump or in his appointees.
To lose, can Republicans only lose four keys since Trump can't run again and no Republican is charismatic? What remaining keys might fall?
Any one of them could fall. Midterm election losses, the economy could hit recession, growth could slow, could have a foreign policy disaster, could, based on his first term, could very well be caught in scandal. But all this is speculation at this point, so don't take it seriously.
Do you feel Biden didn't do enough to prevent billionaires from getting richer during his term, or was Trump's previous term to blame?
Well, I think primary blame is Trump's previous term and the whole recent history of American policy making. You know, when the graduated income tax was first adopted by constitutional amendment in the early 20th century, it was primarily the rich who paid taxes, who paid them. There was no withholding from your paycheck. Did you know that, Sam?
No.
No withholding from your paycheck. You paid quarterly taxes, and most people didn't pay any taxes because they didn't have enough income for quarterly taxes. All that changed during World War II when mass income taxes and payroll deductions was adopted. So it greatly broadened out the income tax and brought ordinary Americans into the paying of taxes. The big problem that has persisted since then is we focus on taxing income, which means people making, middle class or lower middle class or even upper working class wages pay their taxes because they're deducted regularly from their paycheck. But the billionaires whose uh, wealth is primarily in wealth like stocks and other securities, or have it in offshore holdings, or are able to take all these deductions, don't come close to paying their fair share, don't come close to what was envisioned in the graduated income tax. And as a result, from the late 20th century to the present, income and wealth inequality in America has exploded. A lot of gains were made during the New Deal of Franklin Roosevelt, the Great Society of Lyndon Johnson. All of that has been eroded over the last 50 or 60 years to the point where income and wealth inequality in America is as great or greater than it was in 1929 at the eve of the Great Depression. I'm not a big Bernie Sanders fan, but he's right. Until we begin taxing wealth and close the billionaire and loopholes, this is going to persist and even get worse.
Did George W. Bush gain the House in '02 for his response to 9/11?
Uh, they already held the House, but they did very well in the midterm elections of 2002, historically one of the best elections for the party holding the White House. And to a great extent, it was his early effective response to 9/11 and his bringing the nation together. And he actually reaped the benefits of his not politicizing the 9/11 tragedy, but using it to bring the nation together and to forge a consensus on how to respond to international terrorism. That began to break down later, but only after 2002.
Do you think if political parties were not around, there would be less division?
You know, George Washington, in his farewell address, warned against politicization. He was a big opponent even of the nascent political parties that grew up in his own time, proto parties. Indeed, he thought they would divide the nation. And his warning has proven prescient. The problem is you can't stop people from forming political parties. You've got to have some way of organizing uh, policy preferences and gaining and holding power. And obviously, political parties and polarization are, as I think one caller pointed out, not caller, one audience member, correct me on that. That shows what an old dinosaur I am. What's going on in America has its analog in many places around the world.
What are your thoughts on John Fetterman?
I don't understand John Fetterman at all. I thought he was a very strong voice initially for democracy, for equality, for true populism, which challenges the billionaires. But for some reason, he seems to be cozying up to Donald Trump that I can't fathom. And maybe that'll stop after what Donald Trump did today.
Which one would you rather see go, Donald Trump or Fox News?
Thomas Jefferson was once asked, what's more important, a free government or a free press? And he said a free press, because without a free press, you can't have a free government. But with a free press, there's always the possibility of recreating a free government. So that would argue against Fox News, except they're not unique. They'll be replaced. And as I said, I don't think getting rid of Trump would change the MAGA tilt of the Republican Party. But nonetheless, Trump is a very important figure for crystallizing it and expanding and exploiting trends that have, from time to time, with ebbs and flows, but have really existed for the last 100 years of American conservatism. But Trump is not irrelevant to that.
But
So I
wouldn't
would say Trump.
isn't technically Fox News a part of the free press because they can go out and do whatever they
Yes,
want?
yes,
Oh, that's what
absolutely.
yeah. Okay. I wasn't sure what you were saying exactly. What are your secrets to being such a good runner? That's a good question.
It's a really good question. Number one, I've been doing it forever, for over 60 years. I started college at 16 and was a college runner for 4 years and continued it in the submasters and masters division. Some say that's not a good thing. Some say it's better to start in your 40s and 50s because it's less wear and tear in your body than being a runner for over 60 years. But I think it's important for me because it's become a way of life. And I think the most important thing in being a successful runner in old age or a successful athlete of any kind, and your wonderful mom, who's much younger than me, is also going to the senior Olympics. I'm going in track, she's going in swimming. And for both of us, working out, keeping in shape is a way of life. It's not something we do occasionally or on weekends. It's something that's part of our life, and it's got to be part of your life. Now, most people are not going to be competitive runners or swimmers in their 60s or 70s, but it is still the most important ingredient in a successful old age, in my view, is regular aerobic exercise. And it doesn't matter what it is. Could be running, could be swimming, could be cycling, could be tennis, could even be brisk walking. The most important thing is showing up on a regular basis. That's 80%. The other 20%, if you want to become a competitive athlete, like your mom, that's hard, but you don't need it. To have a successful old age, you don't need to be a competitive athlete, but you do need to be active.
All right, we just hit the hour mark.
Two
10
more
o'clock.
questions.
Two more questions.
You've had great questions as always.
This is from Alexander Dulforce. They say, I'm enjoying your great courses lectures on great presidents. Have you ever watched or heard of the British sitcom Yes Minister?
I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it. Maybe Sam has.
I've never even heard of it. So
No, I've heard of it, but I don't really watch TV, so I haven't seen it.
I don't think it's on TV currently.
Oh, okay. But it's
I
probably
mean,
streamed somewhere.
let me see. Yes Minister.
All right, we'll note that. We'll check it out. Two more questions then, because I really couldn't answer that one.
It aired from 1980 to 1984, so it's
Oh, wow.
it's a little old.
Before your time, Sam.
Yeah. I do like British television. I
Yeah,
like
I know you do. Yeah.
I like this show called Taskmaster. I like the Great British Baking Show. I like In-Betweeners. I like a lot of different British television.
Awesome.
Has Elon Musk been appointed yet? The last I the, the
I'm not positive. You know, it's not a traditional appointment that has to go through the Senate. It's like, kind of an extra governmental appointment. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure of its legal status, but I think he is now head of the DOGE.
the last I heard about it was that they are now planning to like install like DOG officials into every agency or something, and
But they're
like
going to have some like checking up on the agencies. I understand. I mean, this can change minute to minute.
I'm telling you what I last heard. The last thing I heard was that there's not gonna be some separate agency that Elon Musk is gonna be the head of. They're gonna install. There was some sort of internal agency or something called the Digital Services, but that was internal to each agency, and they're now replacing that with Dodge. And now
I think that's right.
each
That's that's kind of
agency.
what I was inarticulately trying to say.
But it's funny because they're essentially putting more bureaucrats into each agency with the mission statement of removing bureaucracy. So it's
Right.
like doesn't really make a whole lot of sense.
Well, that's the first irony. The second irony is they fired the inspector generals who were truly independent, nonpartisan watchdogs, and they've replaced them with Musk and Trump loyalists within
Right.
the agencies.
All
One
right.
last,
Um,
I
what's
think
that?
we're probably done.
What? You're
I'll
breaking
take
up.
one last question.
One last question. Okay. Um, most of these last ones are
All right, we
repeats.
can be done. It's almost five after.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to wrap it up.
Yeah, I like that.
I want to give a shout out to the donations we couldn't get to tonight. Jim S, Sharon Novak for Matter What, Krajimir Boyanov, Spencer Arno, and As2Ks. Um, Pretty terrible last 24 hours in the U.S. It just seems like, man, these like first we had the L.A. wildfires, now we have this crash. It seems like we can't escape these massive tragedies
Yeah.
right now. It's pretty horrific.
Your mom corrects me. It's not dog, it's Doge, D-O-G. I did say that. I call it dog kind of
Right.
facetiously.
Yeah, we don't need to make a correction to every single thing.
Right. I call it dog facetiously. I know what it is.
I want to make a quick statement that might seem odd, but I just want to make this clear that nothing said in today's show represents the view of anybody that you and I have ever worked for, will ever work for, or currently work for.
Let
With
me
that,
add to that. I speak only for myself. I don't represent American University or anyone else or anyone I've ever worked with or any organization that I belong to, like the American Historical Association. All my views are strictly my own and do not represent any organization.
right. All right, with that, we will wrap up Lichtman Live for today. Again, our hearts go out to this unimaginable tragedy that happened just outside of D.C. in the Potomac River. To the
An airport we've
families,
been to many times.
right? To the families affected, it's just, it's just a tragedy. What are your final words to the people, Dad?
Yeah, hold the loved ones and the families close to your heart. Think about them and never, ever give up the relentless pursuit of the truth. That's the best gift we can give to the loved ones and the families.